So, welcome to the latest episode. I think we're on our 11th now of Absolutely Zero Knowledge. And I have the pleasure of being joined by Rob, who is from Horizen Labs. And he's going to take us on our journey from way back when. He tells me that Horizen boasts the third ever use case of ZK. So, very, very much in the sort of space and in the ZK realm from the earliest of days. So really excited to welcome Rob. He's going to chat us through absolutely everything Horizen related, right from its inception through to the current day. And yeah, I'm excited for him to take us on a journey. So to kick us off, do you want to give us a very brief introduction? Actually, it doesn't even have to be brief. You can go into as much detail as you want, but a little intro into you and yeah, how you fell upon the world of zero knowledge.
Sure, Ed, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. And I have to say right off the bat, best podcast name ever. Absolutely Zero Knowledge. So fantastic. Actually, very proud to be here. So I'm Rob, CEO of Horizen Labs, and I'm also the co-founder of some crypto projects you may have heard of, including Horizen, part of Horizen Labs name, but also a big one now that we're launching called zkVerify. Now, me personally, I was a physicist and mathematician back in my earlier youth and early career. I was actually a U.S. Air Force officer and worked in what's today what would be called today the Space Force, was called Space Command back when I was there. Worked a bunch of different roles within that career. Went back to academia after I found Bitcoin, and actually had a very open-minded finance department where I went back for my doctorate, and they let me study crypto from an asset pricing perspective, which was kind of shocking. And I think because back then in 2014, they just didn't really know what it was, didn't take it seriously enough to force this first-year PhD student to do something real, so they let me do that. And it ended up being fantastic. So I was probably the popular guy in the department by the time I finished my degree, and they hired me back to teach a couple of blockchain courses at the university. And then I launched ZenCash back in 2017. I started getting active entrepreneurially within the industry, and ZenCash is Horizen today. And that's the third project in ZK that you were referring to.
Awesome. And what about your academic background then? So you mentioned there, what did you study? And I mean, a lot of people within the ZK space go through that very traditional sort of journey of doing some sort of comp sci or mathematical related sort of undergraduate, then a master's, then a PhD. Is that sort of similar to the road you went down?
Yeah, it is. I was a physics and math guy early on, and I was I hoped to contribute to some little chunk to human knowledge, with my career. Turns out I don't think I really have, but I do run a company now that is, so I feel good about that. And I went from physics and math, then my graduate work for my PhD was in finance, so really applied economics, and I focused that. My dissertation was on crypto finance. So I just got lucky in the sense that, I was an early Bitcoiner, and that just gave me the opportunity to kind of break from my early career and switch to academia, which, I love the creation of knowledge. And I was lucky to get a department that allowed me to study crypto finance. Like, I think I'm probably the first person, maybe the only person with an actual dissertation in crypto finance. Maybe there's more now, but it was really like a fun, kind of like a dream come true to be able to study what I love.
Yeah. And then what about your first step into the big bad world of Web3? What was your first foray into the space?
Well, it was called Bitcoin back then. Now we have these fancy terms like Web3, and Gavin Wood did an amazing job creating, this. We have to do this. You start simple and you kind of evolve nomenclature, terminologies, and an industry evolved around it. But I came into Bitcoin as kind of one of these people, like an early libertarian, realistically. So my first intro was a Slashdot article from back in 2011 that just introduced the idea of this new thing, basically this new digital money whose goal was to separate money from state. And to me, as a wannabe economist, back then I was just a low-level physicist. I loved the idea, and it was not that I thought that the U.S. dollar or euro or pound are going to be replaced overnight, but just the idea that we could experiment with money, and now we could incorporate cryptography into the concept of digital money, where you had this concept of digital scarcity, it blew me away. So I was actually at the tail end of my former career working with the U.S. military. I was in Afghanistan, and I just got into Bitcoin and got into it pretty hard and started setting up seminars and teaching people what is Bitcoin, how do you set up a wallet, how do you send money, receive money, and it was fun.
Mm-hmm. And what? So sorry, are you able to share more detail about that sort of, I guess, first project? The first, you mentioned you founded a project? Was there a project founded before Horizen? Then I always sort of admire people who, a lot of people just finish college or university and go into a full-time job working for someone, but I love people who just think, well, for example, Bitcoin or zk is awesome, rather than working with someone, I'm just going to go found my own project. So what was your first one before Horizen?
Well, I didn't think about that at all. It just kind of happened. So Horizen, ZenCash was what it was called. But so I was an early Bitcoiner, and then went back to university for my graduate degree. And then while I was there, I was investing across the space, clearly, like early on Ethereum, and then multiple others. And then I was an advisor on some projects early on, including what is today Aave, which was interesting because back then it was called ETHLend. And just I got to see the industry evolve from very early beginnings. And the first project that I became really active on beyond advising or investing in was ZenCash, and it was the introduction of zero knowledge proofs on chain, which blew me away. And huge hat tip and kudos to zkCash and all of the researchers there and people that took a bet on them to bring them to market. Was kind of mind-blowing in the sense that this is advanced cryptography where you could finally have privacy on chain. And this was kind of one of the early dreams of the Bitcoin world, was that we have this digital money with privacy, and it turned out that Bitcoin itself isn't very private. And fast forward to today, to projects which are phenomenal and much needed, like Chainalysis and others. Bitcoin's not that private. So actually, like overlaying a privacy layer to Bitcoin, and there were earlier projects back then that were trying to do it, but zk on chain was the best thing that I wanted to dive in and start to be part of.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's where Horizen came about. Is that the case? And tell me through the inception of, I guess, Horizen, first of all, in its first sort of format.
Yeah, so Horizen, it's an interesting project, and it's more interesting that I think it gets credit for today, just because it's an OG project, and like I said, third zk project out there. It was really a fork of zcash in terms of the technology. And then we went from basically saying, cool, these guys got zk on chain, let's take that and run with it in a different direction with different functionality than just trying to be your privacy coin that zcash does really well. And that sparked our love of zk, and we built out a phenomenal cryptography and cryptographic engineering team. And over the years, we've just invested in this type of crypto to do different things. We tried going down the path of let's use zk to create kind of a network of blockchains like Cosmos using zk. We did the tech, but didn't really find product market fit. And what we're doing now with this older project is we're actually modernizing it by bringing it on top of the zkVerify platform that we can talk about as well, and really optimizing it as like an optimized EVM for zk. So we're really excited for what is Horizen. It's going through a huge vote right now with the community through our DAO to ratify this new vision that we have. But once we get it ratified, we can deliver pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Are you able to dive maybe slightly more deeply in terms of that third use case you mentioned? Was it the fork of zcash? That was the nuts and bolts of it, was it? But any more detail you can share on that? I think that's what would be awesome to hear a little bit more about.
So this was back in the day. We started in 2016, and back then, innovation really took on the dominant form of innovation in our industry was kind of forking a project and changing some parameters to do different things. So that's what we did. Fork zcash, the stack, and then we were working on kind of a version of decentralized governance with snarks. We're working on like economic innovations. So this was one of the earliest, maybe one of the first projects to actually carve out part of the block reward to fund a treasury pool that could fund development, fund marketing, community building, all those kinds of things. So our innovations there weren't on zk. Actually, the innovations were on like the applications of it and also the economics of what you can do on chain. And it's been an interesting ride, but it's taught me a lot in terms of where the industry is going, because we've seen where it's come from. We know what works, what doesn't work. And now, as we're thinking about new innovations, the innovations aren't really, like, you wouldn't just fork a project and try to innovate that way. You would actually, like right now, we're innovating by modularizing certain functions that can now piece together in a more coherent Web3 application environment. Or you can focus on like specific elements of technology. And you can think of, like, in the ZK world, like things that like RISC-0 is doing, for instance, or Starkware is doing, where you're creating maybe like a better VM that uses ZK, or a Leo's doing, right? Maybe you have a different scripting language that compiles to a ZK circuit, under the hood. So there's different kinds of innovations now, and we're choosing to go down the route of optimizing an EVM environment for ZK with Horizen, and then actually having a ZK verification layer that does like very optimized, fast, and efficient ZK proof verification. Now, these are those elements of, let's look at the ZK stack, and we're carving out a couple of chunks for it, the ecosystem, based on everything we've learned.
Yeah, cool. And I'm always quite keen to know your sort of thought process when founding sort of Horizen in its earliest days. Was it the case that you saw this technology called zero knowledge and thought, that's awesome, I want to build something with it? Or was it a case that you had a problem that you want to solve, i.e., privacy on a blockchain that you mentioned, and you thought ZK is the best tool to use and we're going to go with that? And what was your thought process behind it sort of in its earliest days way back when?
So the former is the worst way to start a company, I have to say. Never start with the technology and think, how do we use this? No, it was actually, I was part of the early privacy advocacy groups within crypto, and just realizing that, privacy is a fundamental human right, and how do we bring it on chain, especially with money. And I think ZCash nailed that. And we were competing there a little bit with a different flavor, but really I think ZCash nailed it. And there are others as well. But then it's, what other things should we have privacy for? And then as we just started going down and doing base research in ZK, and we've built a proving system, by the way, called Darlin, which is a variant of Marlin. We've co-authored multiple important hash functions within ZK. So now that we're really kind of at the heart of ZK, we're realizing, okay, this could apply to many different use cases that are actually solving real problems in the world.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And then you mentioned that was way back in 2016, which is crazy to think. We've got projects sort of popping up almost on a weekly basis now. But to think you were here 8 years ago is pretty crazy. But you've almost developed a little bit and become a bit of a hub for ZK, I guess, and the sort of use cases have evolved massively over the last 8 years. So I don't expect you to take us through a sort of a week by week, chronological story of your time at Horizen, but how the use cases, or how has the sort of ultimately the use of zero knowledge evolved over the last 8 years?
Yeah, so I would say three main ways. So it started with everything related to privacy, and the most fundamental form of privacy application on chain is moving money, right? So, and that's what Zcash is all about. And then it got into solving scaling issues, and scaling issues in a couple of ways. One way is to bump out execution environment into what we call an L2 today. So you can run like a ZK rollup where you're executing massive amount of transactions, technically off-chain, like off of Ethereum on an L2, and you're batching them together with all of these proofs, and you're aggregating proofs, and then basically this batch of proofs is ultimately being verified on-chain on Ethereum. And then the third would be kind of you can think of it like data compression. So look at like what Mina does, for instance, where you use recursion. So you can actually, it's another form of a variant of scaling. And that's why I said privacy in the two variants of scaling, was because you've got like dedicated execution environments, then you've got full recursion where you can actually, in theory, and Mina does it, and we'll see if it can gain more traction with usage, and others will probably adopt it as well. But you can basically compress the entire blockchain down to a ZK proof, which is kind of nuts. You can compress all the state of a blockchain to a ZK proof. And actually, a mutual colleague of ours and friend, Vanishri Rao, has been on X or Twitter recently talking about how she has a thesis that blockchain is going to go away one day, and basically blockchain will evolve into ZK, into a series of ZK proofs to do different things. So this is kind of how the industry has been evolving. But I have to say that I think, given the strong need for privacy around the world, coupled with strong need for massive scalability, if this industry actually succeeds, all points to ZK proofs.
Yeah, that's interesting to know. And I mean, I was at a ZK hack and ZKV sort of sponsored meetup recently. I say recently, I think it was back in March, and Anna Rose from the ZK podcast was there alongside Zach from Aztec, and their fireside talk was basically has ZK almost forgotten about privacy? And I'll be intrigued to get your thoughts. Obviously, ZK ultimately started with very much that core purpose of privacy on chain, and now things exactly as you've described have evolved more to sort of scaling solutions and data compression. And ultimately, the topic of discussion was basically, has ZK forgotten about its roots? Really, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we haven't. There's definitely elements of the industry that absolutely have not. I will agree with them, though, that a lot of the important innovations over the recent history have been on scaling, ZK for scaling, and the L2s just exploded, and there's obviously a very rich world of optimistic L2s, but the ZK rollups have been proliferating and becoming more performant. We've had, over the last couple of years, actually production grade ZK EVMs, which are phenomenal pieces of technology, and coupled with, truth be told, what looks like adverse regulation against the privacy segment of the industry. So I think these two things, where there's just a lot of low-hanging fruit on like really having massive gains within the industry on the scaling part of ZK, to regulators seeming to come down hard on the privacy side of ZK, just has tilted the scale more towards the scalability stuff. But I will say that what we're doing with zkVerify and with Horizen as a ZK EVM for ZK environment, is the applications are actually, for me, more interesting these days. And obviously, like what's going on with the rollups and the ZK VMs, amazing. The ZK VMs, amazing. But it's the applications that are actually, I think, are going to drive the next big wave of adoption and innovation, because we're bringing privacy back on chain. And now we have other tools like ZK IDs, so that we can actually, in a privacy preserving way, correlate people's online or on-chain activity to a real human being, and that real human being can undergo, for instance, a KYC process. You can, for instance, pay your taxes, with your ZK ID. I'm not saying any tax authority accepts that today, but in theory, like we're able to actually have real human beings interact on chain in a privacy preserving way. I think this is going to have an explosion in the ZK app world, and that's why we're focusing heavily on it with zkVerify.
Yeah. And that leads us on perfectly, and we'll touch upon zkVerify in much more detail. But I guess just to give us a bit of context beforehand, what is proof verification?
So proof verification is a really critical part of the value chain of like the life of a ZK proof. So what happens is, you generate a ZK proof. That ZK proof could do anything. It could be proving, state transitions, or, not the fancy terms, but proving that things have happened. Transactions have happened in a valid way, and you can batch them, and then you can, send that proof of batch transactions to a verifier on chain, and that's how it's done today on Ethereum. And then there's a smart contract that automatically executes the verification process. And what verification does is it, like the name suggests, the secret that is contained in that proof, whether these are state transitions, whether it's a private transaction of money transfer or a private DeFi transaction, whatever, that secret doesn't have to be revealed to the world, but that public prover can actually verify that transaction executed properly. So verification is a really important part here, and people historically have thought about verification as the cheapest part of the process, because proof generation is really expensive, and that's where just given the the elliptic curves that have precompiles on Ethereum today, and functions that are there for smart contract devs, those curves imply kind of a heavy burden on proof generation and a really light computational burden on verification. But because ZK is really taking off now, you're seeing a massive amount of gas costs on chain going to just verifying ZK proofs. So, and that leads very naturally to, okay, well, this is an entrepreneurial problem to solve. How do we lower the cost of proof verification?
Cool. And that's another question we'll touch on. Beforehand, for people who are maybe not technical like myself, might be a really dark question. Does every proof need to be verified, or why is proof verification so important?
It does. It needs to be verified in the sense of what's the value of a blockchain. Like a public blockchain is, we have essentially a public database, and in that database, we're all committing certain information, and we're all, like, by definition of it being a public database, we're all, if you run a full node of a blockchain, you're essentially verifying every single, technically you would call it a state transition, but basically every transaction that happens on this blockchain. You need every node in that network to have the ability to verify it publicly without any private information, or else it's a private network. And it's just literally not a public blockchain. So to the extent that public blockchains or these public databases have value, and they have a massive amount of value for specific use cases, not for every, corporate or personal use case, but you need them to be public, and you need anyone in the world to be able to just jump in. Let me turn on my computer. Let me run a server, and I'm going to start verifying, that all these transactions are correct and the state of the ledger is correct. Now, that's holistically. When it comes to ZK proofs, I mean, a proof that hasn't been verified is useless.
Mm-hmm. And so, why is it? What's the challenge right now then with proof verification? You mentioned it's very costly, very inefficient. Why is that the case? Is it just the case that this is still, I guess, an infant technology, and like everything in ZK will naturally get to a point where it is less so? Or what's the challenges right now?
The challenge is you have to run very specific computation to perform the mathematical operation for verification. And it's different than just reading information from a blockchain. Like the read operation from a blockchain is basically free or dirt cheap. And anytime you want to execute computation on chain, that's a shared resource where you have to realize, like, just use an EVM, an Ethereum virtual machine, as an example. Like this is a world's computer, and every node that joins that network needs to execute every single operation. And if you have complex computation, that's a big resource burden on just the servers, the computers, the GPUs, the CPUs that are actually running that software. And that's why it's expensive, because you're basically paying for computation. So the more complex the computation, and ZK proofs are not trivial, the more complex the computation, the more costly it's going to be, right?
Cool. And now, to solve the problem, I guess that's where you come in, right? That's zkVerify.
Us and others. Us and others. Because you can think of like we tackle the ZK segment of the industry, and there's a big industry, a much bigger industry actually outside of the world of ZK today. But within ZK, you can think of, again, like this concept of the life cycle of ZK proof. You have something that happens, whether it's transactions that are happening and being bundled, and a proof being generated on the bundle of them. The generation side is the most expensive computationally today for the types of curves that exist on Ethereum. And that's why we have a lot of innovation, including our friend Vinishri's project Prover Network. It's trying to decentralize and make efficient the process of proof generation. Mm-hmm. And then you have projects that are aggregating proofs. So you can think of it, it's a natural cycle. You're generating a ton of proofs. Well, why don't we add those proofs together? Let's combine them for efficiencies. And then, if we're going to go verify on chain, let's verify something that's kind of like a big combination of proofs. And then you got the verification chunk of it. So of these three elements, there are major innovations going on today within crypto to drop the costs, or do certain product trade-offs, like make them faster, on the generation, the aggregation, of the verification side. We're choosing with zkVerify to really hone in and specialize on the verification chunk of the equation, or of the value chain. For a variety of reasons. We're one of the first to do it, and we're the first modular blockchain to do it. So we're creating like a Celestia for ZK sort of thing that does nothing but ZK proof verification.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to go into more detail then about where zkVerify has come from? I guess you've explained it pretty well there, but and what exactly you're building and how this is going to be used sort of within the ZK space.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's an interesting link to what we were doing with Horizen. So when I said previously that we're working on a scaling project for Horizen, and we invented a proof system, Darlin, the innovation that we created was basically integrating a proof verifier into the consensus of the blockchain. So it was one verifier into the consensus of our blockchain, and every block that was being mined was actually very efficiently verifying ZK proofs. And we realized, wow, by being in this industry, and we were doing a ton of research into ZK rollups and other L2 solutions, and we realized, wow, actually, there's a lot of gas being burned right now. It's skyrocketing. And it started skyrocketing because WorldCoin came out, and WorldCoin was using ZK proofs for their ID, and they were just they were exploding as a use case, and they were just generating so many proofs that needed to be verified that we just saw this explosion of gas on chain for verification. And then we also started seeing a proliferation of L2 projects on Bitcoin. And then we realized there's no way to do ZK in Bitcoin today. And there's some interesting projects like BitVM that are there trying to integrate like a way to do proof verification on chain. And you have the statements from Starkware recently that if opcat for Bitcoin gets passed, then they'll actually integrate a Stark verifier on chain. So there's really interesting stuff there. And we just realized, wow, we have this core technology with a verifier in the consensus of a blockchain that we can just extend. And we moved to a different tech stack. We're using Substrate because it's super efficient and modular and just very modern to do what we need. And we're just integrating every important ZK verifier into basically as pallets into this blockchain, into the consensus of the blockchain. So every block that gets validated, the validators are verifying all of these proofs from all of these different proof systems. It's really unique, innovative, and actually solves a lot of problems, namely one, collapsing the cost of proof verification in Web3. And because we specialize in it, everything's written in Rust efficiently, versus like Solidity on the Ethereum smart contract. And then the cool thing though, and why like our engineers and scientists love it, is because we're able to integrate new verifiers so quickly as pallets into the modular architecture, we can be years ahead of Ethereum, basically like early generators of Ethereum's roadmap. And like an example here would be Vitalik recently was talking about a new proof system called Binius. Well, we can integrate Binius potentially. I mean, it's a little bit more complex than that, but as an example, we could potentially integrate Binius as a pallet into our chain so that devs today could start using Binius and still settle on Ethereum, or use Binius and settle on Bitcoin. Right, versus like it'll take years for a Binius precompile to exist on Ethereum. So like it's kind of this combination of lower cost plus opening up brand new innovations that just couldn't work today on chain. Then we're just really excited for zkVerify.
And another one of my questions that I always think may sound daft, but really useful for me to get my head around things. But who's your sort of target market? Is it literally any project, any ZK project that needs to generate proofs and therefore verify proofs, can ultimately utilize, what you're building right now? Or is there a specific target market in mind? And yeah, that usually helps me sort of picture it, who you're going to be working with. But yeah, is it ultimately any zero knowledge proof project whatsoever that needs to generate and therefore verify proofs?
Well, it's a great question, and it's one that we tackle every day on our go-to-market side. So it's very relevant. And I would say, first start with the theory. The theory is we want to build a platform that just is the platform for proof verification, no matter where the proofs come from. It can come from Ethereum, Bitcoin. We're launching ApeChain with Arbitrum in the very near future. It'll integrate on ApeChain. So we're going to integrate all across Web3, but even proofs that are generated or called off-chain, like outside of Web3 in the Web2 world, we still want to be able to verify. So that's the theory. Now, the reality is going to market, we have to segment in certain ways. And we're finding that the best segmentation for us is not the big L2s themselves, because the big L2s, like you can think of ZK Sync, you can think of Polygon, they're actually getting their massive cost savings by aggregation, which is like a different part of the value chain that I was talking about. Now, you can't aggregate if you're an independent application or an independent roll up and you're not part of these networks. So it's the segment of the market that can't benefit from that type of cryptographic aggregation that could actually verify with us for dirt cheap, collapse their costs, and basically use our system to aggregate across different types of proof systems, not in the cryptographic sense, but we would actually generate a Merkle tree of all the verifications and store the root of that Merkle tree onto your L1 of choice. Right, so it's that segment that, just to say, generically, those that can benefit from major aggregation networks today can benefit massively from us. So that's our first go-to-market. And then you can think about what we're doing, because we're creating the richest kind of environment of different types of proof verifiers. Then we can get into the aggregation business ourselves, depending on which verifier has the most demand and doesn't have a competitor out there already doing it.
I mean, is that ultimately almost like economies of scale, really? Then, if you're a Polygon, for example, who's aggregate, you can aggregate because you work with so many different proofs. Is that ultimately the case?
That's exactly right. And so economies of scale because of volume, but also because they have homogeneous instances of their proof system. And not to sound too academic, but they're running different, like the same instances of their software across. They create a network of for instance, Polygon CDK instances. And because they have a network of very similar blockchains, they can aggregate across them.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I mean, is there anything else you want to add on zkVerify that maybe I haven't asked or I haven't touched upon? It's your chance to, share with the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's the base layer of something that will be much bigger in the sense that we're making a very concentrated and deliberate bet that ZK is going to evolve into one of the most important segments of this industry, if not entirely subsume the industry one day. And it's kind of interesting when you talk to the big optimistic roll-up guys or other people that use that type of technology. Many of them, in their own heads or their own roadmaps, they still think that they're going to incorporate ZK proofs at some point on their roadmap. So I do view it as one of these things. I won't say inevitable because none of us can really predict the future, but all signs are pointing to ZK is going to be such an important part of our industry that what we're doing at Horizen Labs, what we're doing with Horizen, what we're doing with zkVerify, we're integrating all of these things together towards that big bet on ZK, whether it's at the application level with Horizen or at the base consensus level with zkVerify.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you touched upon there what might be next within ZK, but is anything else in store at Horizen? Obviously, you've been on an incredible journey over 8 years, and you're currently at zkVerify. Are all your eggs in that basket, or are there any other bits and pieces that you see you and your team building and working on in the nearish future?
So we're at Horizen Labs. We're always trying to be kind of at the heart of the industry, and whether this was some years ago working with Yuga and Animoca on launching ApeCoin, whether it was kind of launching the NFC collections around the other side metaverse, we've maintained these strong partnerships, and we're always looking at what's next and what's the next big chunk. So we also have a Bitcoin project that will be launched in the very near future with Animoca. It's an Animoca subsidiary company called Darewise, and the project is called Opal. It's actually taking advantage of the ordinals inscription innovations that have been taking place over the last couple of years. So you can always look at us. We're always trying to be what's new, what's interesting, and ultimately how does all this stuff come together. So what we're contributing to that project, other than being launch partners, is basically zkVerify for Bitcoin is what we're looking to do. We want to actually be part of a coalition that's standardizing how proof attestations land on the Bitcoin network. So to us, that's actually the next big thing is if we can do this in a safe way. And I know that there's the Bitcoiners. We'll talk about BitVM version 1, version 2, and so forth, or OpCat. But I will say I'm not a huge fan. As an early Bitcoiner, I'm not a huge fan of adding a lot of complexity onto Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. I think that Bitcoin should remain simple because its core function is to be kind of a reserve currency. But that's not to say that applications and really interesting ecosystems can't leverage all that liquidity. And that's why we're working with projects like Opal and Animoca, because we want to be part of the innovations that are happening there, but ultimately we want to do it in a safe way. And I think that adding attestations on chain versus building entire verifiers into the blockchain is probably the safe bet.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Well, certainly things to sort of keep our eyes peeled for in the future then. But in the meantime, is there any last words or anything else you want to share other than to check out zkVerify?
It'll talk all day. I mean, so we might as well, just call it quits here because this is a lot of fun, and we can keep on going.
Yeah, we'll have to put episode 2 in the diary or part 2 in the diary. But no, massively appreciate you running through that, Rob. I've learned loads. There's, I haven't really touched upon ZK or proof verification at all really in the past. So yeah, I've learned an awful lot, and I appreciate you taking the time out. I'm sure we'll be in touch and get part 2 in the diary.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Cheers, Rob.
All right. Cheers.